2008, BBC premiered Merlin, a reimagining of the King Arthur legend that depicts the famous wizard as a young man working as the prince's servant. On the surface, it seems like a fairly innocent show. It may not be the most engaging series ever made, but some wacky fantasy hijinks could be a fun way to pass the time, yeah? Right? Let me put it this way. If I was given the choice between watching this or graphic, uncensored depictions of brutal medieval torture, I would not only choose the torture, but imagine that all the people being tortured were characters from Merlin. To call this show bad would be giving it too much credit, because at least bad can be fun to watch. The insidiousness of Merlin is that it masquerades as a doofy fantasy adventure while encouraging unconditional submission to authority. I was surprised to learn that this show has a fairly large fan base. I want to take this time to remind all of you that this is just my opinion. If you want to post your disagreements in the comments, that's cool, but let's all remember that this is nothing worth hating each other over. With that said, let's get into this thing. Merlin starts out as a wide-eyed country boy who just moved to the big city. His mother sent him here because she thought it would be easy to hide his magic powers in the kingdom's bustling capital. Unfortunately, he's only there for 5 minutes before he sees someone get beheaded for using magic, at which point it's clear what a phenomenally stupid plan this is. King Uther is a corrupt tyrant on a mission to eradicate magic. 20 years ago, he began the Great Purge, where his knights hunted down magic users and put them to death. Now he continues that genocide by executing anyone who has powers. So I'm not really sure what the hell Merlin's mom was thinking. Not only did she send him to the most dangerous place in the world for wizards, but she has him live with Gaius, who works closely with the king. Gaius is a magic user too, though he has put that part of his life behind him. He was the one who helped Uther hunt down magic users 20 years ago, because apparently they were all just so evil that he thought it was the right thing to do.
People used magic for the wrong end at that time. It threw the natural order into chaos. Uther made it his mission to destroy everything from back then, even the dragons.
Gaius is really glossing over a few key details here, like all those villages they burned and children they orphaned.
You would betray another sorcerer.
You did. When you turned a blind eye and let my parents die at the hands of Uther.
But hey, I guess that's just what it takes to restore the natural order. Anyway, it's time we talk about the show's other main character, Arthur.
Come on! Run! You want some moving target practice?
Now I thought for sure that this kid was Arthur, and this little Vladimir Putin turned Abercrombie model was like the castle bully. He'd be a big jerk in the beginning, but as Arthur starts earning people's respect, he'd eventually be less of a douche and join the friend group. As it turns out, Arthur is the guy throwing daggers at the helpless servant. If you think this is a story about how the prince grows into a kinder, nobler person, you're wrong. It's actually about convincing us that this arrogant, privileged jackass is the best leader anyone could hope for. Merlin dislikes the prince at first, but later that night he meets John Hurt, who tells him that Arthur will be the greatest king of all time.
Arthur is the once and future king who will unite the land of Albion.
Right.
That one prediction that Merlin never bothers to confirm is all it takes to turn him into Arthur's #1 simp. After saving Arthur's life, Merlin is appointed the prince's servant, and thus he begins a happy life licking the boots of this murderous family. The other main cast members are Gwen, a castle servant and Arthur's future wife, and Morgana, Uther's illegitimate daughter who lives in the castle as his ward. As Arthur's servant, Merlin now has a front row seat to all of the king's shenanigans. In case starting something called the Great Purge wasn't enough to tip you off, it soon becomes apparent that Uther is a deranged psychopath. Every time you think he can't get any worse, he finds a way to top himself. With all this, you would think that Merlin would do everything in his power to oust this lunatic and end the persecution of his people. But no, I guess that plot would have just made too much sense. In actuality, Merlin and Gaius spend most of their time saving his life. Despite being paranoid about magic, Uther often dismisses threats as superstition. If not for Merlin, he would have been killed over a dozen times, and he wouldn't have anyone to blame but himself. But Gaius explains that it's actually better to let this unhinged murderer stay in power than allow an inexperienced Arthur take the throne. The show also tells us that murder is wrong, and even ignoring a threat to the king is objectively immoral.
It is Uther that persecutes you and your kind, Merlin. It is Uther that murders the innocent.
But surely that doesn't make it right to kill him.
Never mind that, by saving the king, Merlin has enabled him to kill many more people, including people close to him and his friends. In the Series 1 episode, To Kill the King, Uther kills Gwen's father after he unwittingly assists an assassin. Merlin and his friends are horrified by this. Morgana, who considers Gwen a close friend and was already disgusted by Uther's cruelty, decides to take action and kill him. After eavesdropping on her plan, Merlin goes through a serious moral crisis. In a gold medal-worthy leap of logic, he somehow gets it in his head that allowing this to happen would be the same as killing Uther himself. Plagued with indecision, he asks Gwen how she feels.
If you had the power of life and death over Uther, would you kill him? For what he did?
No.
No.
What would that solve? That would make me a murderer. That would make me as bad as him.
You're right.
It should go without saying that the two crimes here are not remotely comparable. Gwen has no power. She has to swallow her grief and continue working for the man who killed her father. Uther is free to do what he wants without consequence. You can't imprison him, you can't banish him, you can't stop him. The people who suffer under that kind of authority are not just as bad for using violent means to end it. No one should understand this better than Merlin. His very existence is considered a crime under the king's reign, and he has seen the horrors afflicted upon his people. But this reality completely flies over his head. Instead, he breathes a sigh of relief as Gwen's answer allows him to shut off his brain and stick to a simple narrative. Killing bad. If you've seen even one episode of this show, then you probably already know how ridiculously hypocritical this is. The show changes its mind about murder so much that I wonder if the writers even spoke to each other. Before talking to Gwen, Merlin asks John Hurt if he should save Uther, and he says, "No, obviously you should let him die. That's been the plan all along. Are you stupid?" To which Merlin responds,
Where does it say my destiny includes murder?
"Good question, Merle. Where in your destiny does it say anything about murder?" You might be thinking there must be some explanation for those. Maybe they're all done in self-defense. But, no, not really. Merlin is perfectly fine taking life in almost any situation. He never expresses remorse for the people he's killed either, many of whom were victims of Uther's purge. Because the truth is that it's not murder Merlin dislikes, it's radicalism.
Anything that challenges the future is radical. Anything that just repeats what's always happened before.
Like horses and hunting.
Yes, like horses and hunting. Well, that's not very radical at all. It's medieval.
Merlin hates Uther, but he still believes that people are better off under the reign of a monarch, and anyone who dares to challenge that system is a dangerous anarchist. This isn't murder. It's patriotism. This is a big part of what makes the show so infuriating. It sets up some decently complex moral dilemmas, but instead of exploring them, it shoves the most simplistic narrative down our throats. A great example is when Merlin meets his long-lost father, whose help he needs to stop John Hurt from attacking Camelot. Merlin's dad refuses, and tells the story of how Uther betrayed him and killed all of his friends.
Why would he not let me be?
What was it that I had done? That he wanted to destroy the life I built, abandon the woman I loved? He sent knights to kill me. I was forced to come here, to this.
Now, maybe it's wrong to ask a man forced to live in a cave to save the people who put him there. But on the other hand, who is he to be so angry about it?
Have you no conscience?
You should ask that question of your father.
Do you know better than him?
Here we have a situation where many innocent people will die if his father doesn't help. But at the same time, he'd be preserving a system that will go on to ruin many more people's lives. And while Merlin is also a victim of this system, he does enjoy certain privileges. He lives safely in the castle. He has minor political influence. He benefits from atrocities Uther has committed. Merlin and Gaius have decided that it is better to work with the oppressors than help the people fight for freedom. And although they are occasionally called out for this, there's never any serious discussion about their complicity in the kingdom's crimes. After all, they always have the prophecy backing them up. As long as Arthur takes over and fixes everything, Merlin can be sure that everything he does to protect the state is 100% justified. Of course, the prophecy came from that same dragon that's burning all those innocent people in this episode. But surely it's all still true. Arthur is definitely going to lift the ban on magic. He'll make reparations with all the people Uther hurt. It's going to be a fucking paradise. As we saw earlier, Arthur begins the series as a spoiled, arrogant jerk, and I think this is actually a pretty good angle to start from. People love watching handsome douchebags turn into soft boys so they can fantasize about fucking them. Zuko from Avatar, Jaime Lannister, Spike from Buffy, Piccolo. But what makes those stories work is that those characters make an effort to change. There's plenty of room for Arthur to grow. Uther may love him, but he's not a good parent. He values strength and macho posturing and only rewards Arthur for those qualities. There's no consideration for his son's emotional needs or moral development. Facing unhealthy expectations, Arthur is understandably obsessed with proving his strength and worthiness. It often falls to Merlin and Gwen to gently reassure him that he doesn't have to live up to those standards.
I have to be back on the course in 5 minutes, so I forfeit the match.
You can't possibly joust. You're too badly injured.
I have never withdrawn from a match. I do not intend to start now.
You would risk your life to protect your pride. You have nothing to prove, least of all to me.
But even keeping that in mind, it's important to remember that he has more responsibility and privilege than most. He's educated, he's one of the best trained fighters in the world, and he has servants to handle his daily needs. And then there's the very minor perk of inheriting ultimate executive power. Instead of showing us why Arthur would be a good ruler, we're just reminded over and over again that he's destined to be the best one. His shortcomings are played down while the show focuses on the few instances where he acts like a decent person. His good moments aren't even difficult decisions. It's always low-hanging fruit like, "Gee, Dad, I really don't think it's right to keep all the food for ourselves during a famine." On the rare occasion where he is called out, it's always for trivial kindergarten bullshit.
This is my home, and you are my guest in it. Would it kill you to say please and thank you once in a while?
We're supposed to believe that Merlin's complicity in this regime is justified because Arthur is going to be the best. But that reputation needs to feel earned, and it just isn't here. Despite starting off on the wrong foot, Merlin joins Team Arthur real quick. Which is weird, because Arthur spends most of the series treating him like shit.
Do you have to go in there right now?
Why?
I just washed the floor.
Don't worry, I won't slip over.
You really have no idea, do you?
All you have to do is wipe it.
How would you know?
I beg your pardon, Merlin.
You've never had to do it.
Oh, I know how to use a cloth and bucket.
Oh, yeah.
It's easy. Here, let me show you.
I was honestly stunned to learn the relationship between these two is beloved by the fans. Many people even ship them together. And you know, the whole time I'm watching this thing, I'm just thinking, what? What was romantic exactly? Was it all those times Arthur hit him and called him an idiot? Or how about that time he force-fed him a rat in one of the most uncomfortable scenes I've ever witnessed?
This isn't pork. It's far too stringy. What is it? It's rat, isn't it?
Try not to think about it.
Look at me. I'm being rude. Here I am, stuffing my face with this delicious stew, when you're hungry too. Come on. Take a seat. Eat. Plenty more. Eat.
Try not to think about it. Eat.
Merlin occasionally gets a little quip in every now and then, but it's not the same. Arthur has complete power over him. He could even have him killed. In many episodes, he forces him to endure some demeaning chore, and Merlin just does it all with this big grin on his face like it's the greatest privilege of his life.
I think it's fair.
It's one of the most unhealthy relationships I've ever seen on TV. Merlin's face lights up whenever Arthur throws him a kernel of affection, and he soon develops a creepy devotion to the prince. As early as season 1, he eagerly offers to sacrifice himself on his master's behalf.
I willingly give my life for Arthur's.
How brave you are, Merlin. If only it were that simple.
What do you mean?
Once you enter into this bargain, it cannot be undone.
Whatever I have to do, I will do. His life is worth 100 of mine.
What? Okay, so I already live in a world where people tie their sense of self-worth to their wealth and social status. I really don't want to see a fantasy series where this sentiment is echoed without any commentary or self-awareness. You can try to tell me it's more about Merlin and Arthur's special relationship, but that's just as f***ed up. There is no scenario where this kind of sentiment is healthy. One of the most f***ed up parts about this is that the entire Merlin-Arthur relationship is based on a lie. Merlin does not tell Arthur he's a wizard until the last episode. Think about that for a second. His entire plan hinges on Arthur accepting magic. So you'd think he'd do everything in his power to tear down the prince's bias. If he really believes in this guy, being honest with him and building a stronger relationship is a pretty good way to get there. This is a show that spans years, several of which Arthur's the king and doesn't have the excuse of daddy making him do bad things. Merlin has many opportunities to reveal himself, but he doesn't, which tells us that he's still concerned his friend would murder him.
Why did you never tell me?
You'd have chopped my head off.
In fact, Merlin will actually lie to make sure Arthur keeps hating magic. In the episode The Sins of the Father, Arthur gets an opportunity to speak to his dead mother, who reveals to him that Uther used magic to help her conceive a child even though it would kill her. Uther then lied to the people and said a sorceress killed the queen, using that as justification for the Great Purge. Arthur flies into a rage, and he finally does something I'd been waiting for the entire series.
My mother is dead because of your selfishness and arrogance. Her blood is on your hands.
No, that's not true. But Morgause would have you believe that.
This is what fuels your hatred for those who practice magic, rather than blame yourself for what you did. You blame them.
You would believe a sorcerer's lies over the word of your own father? I can only think that Morgause has enchanted you.
You have hunted her kind like animals. How many hundreds have you condemned to death to ease your guilt?
Those who practice magic will stop at nothing to destroy us. I have only done what is necessary to protect this kingdom.
You speak of honor and nobility. You're nothing but a hypocrite and a liar!
I was floored when this happened. I was truly starting to wonder if the show had any self-awareness. But here is an actual call-out for all of Uther's terrible crimes, and it's good. It was the first time I was actually rooting for Arthur. It's one thing to just pretend, like Uther isn't as bad as they've made him out to be. But once it's brought into the open like this, there's no going back. We want our protags to fight against him. The last thing you should do right now is put that genie back in the bottle. So don't you fuck this up, Merlin. This is what you wanted. This is how Arthur becomes the king people deserve.
Arthur, please. Put the sword down. You heard what my mother said. After everything he has done, do you believe he deserves to live? He executes those who use magic, and yet he has used it himself. You have caused so much suffering and pain. I will put an end to that. Morgause is lying. She's an enchantress. She tricked you. That was not your mother you saw. That was an illusion.
This had the potential to be one of the greatest moments in the show. And this little fuckface ruined it. I'm not gonna say that stopping him from killing his father is a bad decision, but there had to be a way to do that without throwing oppressed people under the bus. If Merlin hadn't lied, then the relationship between father and son would have changed forever, and that's what needed to happen. If you want me to accept this spoiled prick as a hero, then he has to acknowledge and condemn Uther's atrocities. Countless people have been killed by his dad, and their loved ones will be expected to kneel before him when he takes the throne. While Arthur sometimes shows remorse about the purge, these moments have always been in private. In public, he supports his dad completely.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, when Camelot gets itself a half-decent king.
Careful. He is my father.
This moment could have been the beginning of something better. Arthur would be forced to question the way he was raised and what it means to be a king. Uther would face Shakespearean consequences for his crimes as he battled the heir he sacrificed his wife to create. The people would be forced to choose between the king who lied to them or the prince who started a revolution. After 2 seasons of fumbling around with stupid shit like Uther marrying a troll, we'd finally address the serious problems the show likes to talk about but never face. I'm not saying the show had to go that direction, but returning to the status quo after this is unbelievable. Merlin has just ensured Arthur will hate magic even more, and he doesn't even care. You want to see how this episode ends?
I'm proud of you, Merlin.
Arthur's thanking me, Uther's grateful, you're proud. I've never been this popular.
I'm almost certain it won't last.
Just let me enjoy the moment.
With heroes like Doofus and Dingus over here, you gotta wonder what the villains are like. There's Uther, of course, although he isn't treated exactly like a villain by the show's standards. Most antagonists are given no depth or sympathy. Even the ones with tragic backstories are labeled as unforgivable monsters. With Uther, the show sometimes likes to pretend that he isn't the worst person ever. In spite of how terrible he is, everyone acts like it's a great tragedy anytime he's close to death. They will gather around his bedside and wring their hands in despair. It makes sense that there would be mixed feelings about his passing, but all we're presented with is this sense of tragedy that wouldn't be so bad if any other villains got similar treatment. But Uther is the only one we're prompted to feel bad for, even though many of the antagonists were fighting to end oppression. In many cases, the only reason we can still call them villains is because they end up doing something so egregiously evil that we're forced to say, ah yes, that's why radical action is bad actually. Like the burned kid, he has every reason to want to kill Uther, but he also tries to hurt Gaius, so I guess he deserves to have an axe thrown in his face? There's also a guy who rallies wizard refugees against Uther, but apparently that's something a cult leader would do? This guy is basically Charles Manson. And then there's Gilly, one of the few wizards who actually calls out Merlin for aiding the king.
You could be a servant and pretend you're less than him, but I'm not gonna...
No, that's not what I do!
No? You're defending the king! Protecting a man that would have you dead!
I'm protecting you!
You've been pretending for so long now that you've actually forgotten who you are.
That's not true.
This kid doesn't even do anything wrong. He joins a tournament where killing is legal to end Uther's life, and Merlin and Gaius still act like this is some horrible crime.
We'll have to put an end to this. If he fights tomorrow, either his magic will be found out, or worse, the king will die.
Merlin shakes his head in righteous disapproval when he witnesses Gilly benefiting from his powers. The conclusion of this episode doesn't even offer any meaningful response to Gilly's argument. Merlin calls him a traitor to wizard kind, and he agrees, randomly saying that magic corrupts, which is not a thing that's ever come up before or after this. No one's worried Merlin is turning to the dark side, even though blowing people up seems to be his favorite spell. But of all the antagonists, no one gets done dirtier than Morgana, or as you may know her, the evilest, sexy, scary female woman lady witch in all the land.
I want you dead!
In the beginning, Morgana is the only character that feels like an actual hero. She speaks out against Uther's tyranny, takes action to save oppressed people, and treats everyone with respect no matter their class.
Where did you get that? I was able to smuggle it out of the palace kitchens. Share it out amongst the children and old people. Make it go as far as you can.
But this is one of Camelot's most legendary villains, so don't get too used to having a person around here who actually makes sense. In Season 1, it's revealed that Morgana has prophetic dreams, a side effect of her hidden magical powers. But while Gaius constantly praises Merlin's powers as a divine blessing, he's instantly suspicious of Morgana and chooses to keep her in the dark. He takes it upon himself to drug her to suppress her powers, claiming Uther would find out otherwise. To my shock, when Morgana seeks answers about the weird things happening to her, Merlin actually sticks up for the right thing.
Morgana knows nothing for certain.
Which makes it even worse. She isn't sure what's happening to her and it's tearing her apart.
And what would you have me do?
Talk to her. Tell her she'll be okay. Tell her that her powers aren't something to be afraid of.
Unfortunately, the old toad convinces Merlin to gaslight her anyway, leaving her to suffer in panic and confusion. It's not until she meets her long-lost sister Morgause that she has a healthy, honest relationship with someone. Morgause is a magic user trying to end Camelot's tyranny. When she is reunited with her sister, she plots a near-bloodless coup by using Morgana as a catalyst for a kingdom-wide sleeping spell. Even though this is a way to end Uther's reign without killing anyone but the tyrant, Merlin still decides that saving him is the right thing to do, by fatally poisoning Morgana. The villainous Morgause decides saving her sister is more important than killing the king, and the two run off together. If you liked Morgana before this episode, I've got some bad news, because she is dead. She is dead now. I mean, there's still a character named Morgana, and it's the same actress, and she has the same backstory, but it's not her. See, this Morgana will kill people without hesitation. She's obsessed with taking over the throne, and she really loves making menacing smirks. She doesn't even have any qualms about killing her own friends, even Gwen, who, the original Morgana, had a very affectionate relationship with. Morgana was one of the kindest, most empathetic people in the early episodes, and this new character is the complete opposite of that. Like Arthur, her development does not feel natural or earned. Once again, they laid the groundwork for an interesting character arc, but failed to capitalize on it. All the people closest to Morgana lied to her. It's easy to see that Merlin and Gaius' refusal to trust her created a self-fulfilling prophecy, and she would naturally turn to the first person that was honest with her. Morgana and Morgause end up having the strongest relationship in the entire series. There are no betrayals, they're always happy to see each other, and they go above and beyond to support one another. It's a stark contrast to the cycle of abuse Merlin is trapped in with Arthur. The strong bond between these two makes sense, and it would have been interesting to see Morgana struggle as she betrayed her friends while growing closer with her sister. Instead, we get a completely unhinged lunatic who tries to force loyalty from soldiers by killing unarmed civilians. From what I saw, Morgana represents the dangers of radicalism. Unlike Arthur, she sees Uther for what he is and knows he must be stopped. Unfortunately, that could get in the way of Merlin's royal ass-kissing. Right after learning that Uther drowned children, he doesn't hesitate to suggest they turn Morgana over and let him execute her.
We must tell Uther what Morgana has done. Are you mad? He'd have both our heads if we made such accusations. He'd look on it as treason.
We can't just let her get away with it.
By Season 4, Morgana has devolved into a paranoid, power-hungry tyrant. According to the show, this is what happens to people who think change can happen outside the system. There's no commentary on how Merlin and Gaius' actions, like, say, lying and drugging her, might have contributed to any of this. They even reassure each other that pushing her down some stairs is okay as long as it protects the king.
It wasn't your fault, man.
I prevented something much worse from happening.
If Merlin stopped to think for himself for 5 seconds, he might have realized that Morgana would have been a pretty decent ruler. She already had a claim to the throne, and unlike her brother, she didn't need constant badgering to become a better person. As a magic user, she would have represented a definitive change in the system. It would have been the logical next step for this society. But a bastard woman as queen is a pretty radical idea, and if there's one thing Merlin is good at, it's staying medieval. At first glance, Merlin seems like a drastic departure from the conventional Arthurian legend, but it actually stays true to the spirit of the original stories. Camelot was an origin myth for the British Empire. It gave people a sense of nationalistic pride and helped the monarchy maintain power. Kings Henry VII and VIII claimed they were descendants of Arthur, and later Queen Victoria used motifs from the story to reinforce her regime. It's even said that in times of crisis, Arthur himself will rise from the grave to save England from devastation. I don't think the creators of Merlin intended to make pro-monarchy propaganda, but they did. The show tells us that some people are meant to serve while others are born to rule. It's not even subtle.
Some men are born to plough fields. Some live to be great physicians, others to be great kings.
Within the logic of the show, you can't really argue with that statement. The entire plot revolves around determinism, and, by extension, the divine right to rule. The show never references any specific faith, even the Holy Grail is renamed the Cup of Life, but the existence of a god is heavily implied. Merlin places complete trust in John Hurt's prophecy. No one asks where it came from or why it exists, it just must be true. A higher power is real, and it has decided that Arthur is the rightful king of England. Going against that plan is misguided and evil. I realize that most people watching this show don't see more than another fantasy series with, endearing characters. No one is tuning into Merlin for political commentary, but I think it's still worth examining the values presented here. There's a popular Merlin fanfiction called Kingdom Come. It's a complete script for a hypothetical final series, and it takes place in the modern day, where an immortal Merlin suffers extreme PTSD after witnessing Arthur's death. Eventually, Arthur rises from the dead, fulfilling the prophecy that he will return when he's needed most. Merlin then convinces him that despite centuries of efforts to give people a voice in politics, what we really need is to have another king. The series ends with all of the UK agreeing to once again live under a monarchy. Everyone rejoices as democracy dies and the feudal system is reinstated. I'm not trying to attack Kingdom Come's creators here. They're fairly competent scriptwriters, and if you like Merlin, you'd probably enjoy this. But like 50 Shades of Grey and other popular fanfictions, the narrative definitely says something about the show and what people got out of it. Merlin glorifies the fantasy of a benevolent, all-powerful ruler who will lead us to salvation. We don't need to think too hard about how the ruling class can destroy a person's life and still count on their servitude because they have no other options. They need unchecked power so that they can protect us from foreign invaders and make the country great again. What's really amazing is that even when Arthur takes over, nothing really changes. He never does anything to help wizards, and the ban on magic is never lifted. The greatest ruler to ever walk under the sun still won't do the bare minimum to help persecuted people. How damn low are our expectations supposed to be? Merlin tells us that you need to know your place and be happy with it. The actions of your government are not for you to worry about. Even when the system commits atrocities against you, you have no right to challenge it. Shut up, do your work, and hope that one day, maybe, someone in charge will be decent enough to do what's right. But don't count on it, even from the best of them. There's a lot we wanted to say about this show, and even after all this, we still didn't cover everything. I may make a follow-up covering some specific episodes, but until then, if you got something useful out of this video and think others could too, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I want to give a big thanks to my patrons who have been very patient as I worked on this one. It's been a pretty tough year, as I'm sure everyone knows, but I'm set up in a new workspace now and hoping videos will pump out a little more quickly. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you can, please give this a share. It really helps me out.